Hello, I'm Lisa Woollett. I'm a writer and photographer, and I'm here at my local beach, which is Lansalos in southeast Cornwall, which has featured in several of my books so far, including the most recent one, which is called Rag and Bone. In Rag and Bone, I follow a branch of my family that were dustmen and scavengers over 7 generations, from the Thames in central London out to the estuary and eventually the sea around Cornwall. It's told through a series of beachcombing and mudlarking walks, which is something I've done since childhood, and ends up here at Lansalos. I'm recording this during lockdown, and this has meant that all of the launch events have been cancelled for the book. So over the last 2 months, I started a blog called the Travelling Museum of Finds, which is a virtual version of something that is part suitcase, part printer's tray that I was intending to take to various events at festivals and bookshops once the book came out, but I can't do that. So I've started the blog as a kind of show and tell of some of the objects that I found during the mudlarking and beachcombing walks, which took a year to do the walks, but it's taken about 2.5 years to write the book. And so I've got quite a few finds with me. I haven't brought my travelling museum down here with me, but I've brought a travelling shoebox of finds today, and thought I would show you a few of the finds. I particularly liked finding ordinary, quite domestic objects, and one of my favourites is this, which I found in the Thames, on the Thames foreshore, close to where my family lived in central London in Victorian times, early Victorian times. So this is a comb. This is actually 17th or 18th century, and the fine side of the comb was to tease out the nits. Some of these were found on the Mary Rose when it was raised in the 80s, which sunk. It was a Tudor warship that sunk in 1545, and when they dried out the combs, they found 500-year-old nits caught in them still. So that's one of the favourites. One of the reasons I like combs is that I find a lot now as well. So there's a lot of my finds, the early finds that are made from bone would nowadays be made from plastic. And this type of comb, I find a huge number of these on Cornish beaches. Some are older. This one, some of the older ones sink, the older plastics. And this one, you can see the little keelworm tubes because it's been on the sea floor and it washes up after storms with the debris from the seabed. Another favourite, and this is bone as well, and I also have plastic ones. This is a bone toothbrush. I particularly like this one because it has grains of sand caught in the holes in the bone. These were my favourite story about these, whether it's true or not, I don't know, is that they were invented by William Addis in 1780, and he was imprisoned at the time for rioting in the East End of London, and is said to have been inspired by a broom in the corner of his cell, and he began production when he came out, and they were being mass produced by the time my family were living where I found the comb. These were being mass produced, although apparently quite a lot of families only had one between the whole family, and they were quite big families in Victorian times. Once again, this is an old one from the Thames. This is plastic, quite an early plastic one. And you can see the copper wire in the holes where they held the bristles in place. With the bone ones, they were originally boar hair bristles, so pig hair or Siberian boar was apparently the best. Another favourite are the bone buttons. This is a piece of waste from making, and this is another one, from making bone buttons or beads by hand. And these are the bone buttons again. I find these in the Thames. The toothbrush, the bone toothbrush, was actually found on a Cornish beach, which is really unusual. The Thames mud is a really good preservative, and some of the things come out of the mud in as good a condition as they went in. But on Cornish beaches, they've often had a harder time. So that's another bone button. I particularly like the buttons because my nan had a button box, and both my mum, so that would have been in the 40s and 50s, and then me in the 70s, spent a long time sorting my nan's button box. And it was quite a good example of how things were reused then in a way that they weren't today. And buttons would always be cut off and reused back then. I've got two other favourite buttons. This one is old. This is from the Thames. This is a pewter blowhole button, and it dates from 1650 to 1750. And these that would be 18th century frock coats that would have been worn on. But once again, lots and lots of plastic buttons turn up on Cornish beaches now. This is an Action Man hard hand. It dates from 1966 to 1973. After that, he got grippy hands. And I only found this out during lockdown when I was writing a post for the Travelling Museum. I recognised it and found an expert on Action Man hands. And so that's one of the older pieces of plastic I have. Another is this. This is Butch from Sooty, the TV programme that aired, I think, from the 1950s originally, but this one was free. These came free with Cocoa Pops in 1973 with the freebie plastic. Plastic was cheap then, and so it started coming for free in cereal boxes. Also, these are other cereal toys. These are cycle reflectors, and they came free with Kellogg's cornflakes in 1989. One other plastic I've got here to show you is this, which is a party popper, but this one clearly has these rather distinctive bite marks of fish on it. So we can see what happens to that in the marine environment. And as it breaks down, it becomes easier for it to enter the food chain in that way. This is Chapter 6, the Isle of Sheppey. We set off along the stony beach, past gulls and oyster catchers strung out at the mud edge, waiting for the tide to fall. Offshore, odd shapes were just beginning to break the surface, appearing in silhouette against the low sun. A tyre and a concrete slab, the handlebars and front wheel of a bike. Presumably they'd all come down with the cliff, with the heaviest of the debris left stranded where it fell. As we headed towards Warden Point, we which is no longer a point, the strange, unstable landscape felt almost immediately remote. On exposure to air, London clay weathers to brown, and here it rose above the shore in odd peaks and turrets. In places, a crumbling, teetering pinnacle was held together by no more than the remains of a single scrubby bush, its exposed roots curling out into the air. We stopped first at a place where metal collects. It was a spot I'd searched in the past, and on a previous visit, I turned up what I considered an extraordinary find. It was the grey of lead I noticed first, standing out amongst the rust-coloured pyrites, although it was only on picking it up that I realised it was a horse's head. I was delighted, as the legend everyone grows up with on the Isle of Sheppey is of Sir Robert de Shurland and his horse Grey Dolphin. On school trips, we would be taken to see his medieval tomb in the island's Minster Abbey, where Sir Robert's reclining effigy lies beside a horse's head emerging from the waves. As Baron of Sheppey, Sir Robert's rights included blood white, the right to find servants for the shedding of blood, child white, the right to find fathers of illegitimate children, and wreck of the sea, which entitled him to any wreckage found within the limits of his domain, whether ashore, bumping, or even floating, within 3 miles of low water mark. In order to claim the wreck as his, though, the Baron had to be able to touch it with the tip of his lance at low tide. So, to make the most of this, he is said to have trained his horses to swim. The best was Grey Dolphin, thought to be depicted by the horse's head carved into the tomb beside him. The story we were told is that in the 14th century, Sir Robert killed a monk. With the church seeking retribution, the Baron heard that the king was anchored off Sheppey on the Nore sandbank, so saddled Grey Dolphin and swam out to his ship. He made a full confession and was pardoned by the king, then turned Grey Dolphin and swam back to shore. Although the exhausted horse managed to reach the beach at Minster, a local witch was waiting. "You think that horse has saved your life," she told the Baron, "but it will be the death of you." In response, he drew his sword and cut off the horse's head. A year later, though, he was walking that same stretch of shore when he injured his toe kicking what he thought was a rock. But it was the skull of Grey Dolphin. Within days, Sir Robert's toe had festered, and back home at Shurland Hall he died. Standing on the shore, holding the lead horse's head, actually the remains of a 19th century child's toy, I swore quietly to myself at my luck. What were the chances of finding it where I had, on a beach little more than a mile from Shurland Hall? At the age of 12, a friend and I had camped alone in its isolated ruins, but got so scared we ran back to our house after dark. Today, at the same spot with Laurie, I found several modern coins, a grand total of 11 pence, and so salt corroded, I was initially hopeful they were older, and a bell. It was small and round, and although bent and damaged, it still had the P inside. I rinsed it and gave it a shake. And although the sound wasn't exactly musical, it did, after a fashion, still ring. Later, I learned it was a crottle bell, an animal bell dating to the 17th or 18th century. Known also as rumble bells, they were often attached to horses' harnesses to warn of approaching horse-drawn vehicles on quiet country lanes. On reflection, it seemed poignant to have found it where I did, where the old road once led out to the church, and the village and so much farmland had been lost to the sea. Presumably, it was also as close as I'd get to hearing church bells toll beneath the waves. I hope to see you at the North Cornwall Book Festival.